the possible explanations of what happened with Professor of Aerospace and Engineering Sinead O'Sullivan. One explanation, Sinead, is this issue about some kind of atmospheric pressure drop-off. Talk us through that explanation.
Yeah, no, this is an incredibly rare atmospheric phenomenon. It's called the induced atmospheric vibrations, which is just as weird as it sounds. So basically, you know, this potentially could be down to very, very large and extreme temperature differences within layers of the atmosphere. So we're not talking about, you know, people kind of said, well, it couldn't be that because it's not even that hot in Madrid. We're not talking about the difference in temperature between Madrid and Lisbon. You know, we're talking about the difference in temperature between 1 kilometre up to 8 kilometres in the atmosphere, where these massive high voltage power lines tend to move energy from one country to another. So if you have at 1,000 kilometres 5 degrees, and then at 2,000 kilometres minus 15 degrees, that 20 degree, and they think it could have been around 20 to 25 degrees difference, is massive, because usually you only get 6 to 7 degrees of difference. So that difference in temperature creates very volatile air that would have physically moved and created oscillations in these power lines. Now, the grid is extremely sensitive, so anything that goes physically out of synchronization is going to cause big issues.
Sorry, this might be a really stupid question, but there are power lines. These are power lines that are much lower to the ground, but the pressure difference is much higher?
Some of these power lines can be very high up in the air. So not only, you know, when I say 1,000 to 2,000 meters, you know, that doesn't necessarily have to be, that could be above sea level.
Right.
Now, for example, I mean, if you imagine these power lines, I don't know if you've seen them before, they're really tall. And so even the ability to move with wind or other conditions at that height is actually massive. It's not like being on the ground. These things are actually very high up.
And so I guess the question then, you know, as we heard from the previous guest, he didn't feel it was right to blame anyone. But is this something that could have been predicted, or at least the need for these power lines to be more resilient is a legitimate question for voters to ask in the years ahead?
I think so, because, you know, again, it's a very rare phenomenon. Yet we did actually see something in Spain, Portugal, France around 2003. They think it was something very similar. Now, the issue here, potentially what we may see unfolding, is not so much that the circuit breakers didn't work properly in this instance. I think they did. But I think what we might be talking about today is that the fact that the backup grid energy was moved nearly entirely to renewables, which are themselves a very, very unstable form of energy. So there is this kind of question around, if we are moving towards a world of fully renewable and sustainable energy, how do we modulate massive power grid systems across Europe? We are, of course, living in an era of unprecedented climate volatility. So even turbulence in an aircraft is now an issue where it didn't used to be. Again, because of the massive movement of air in the atmosphere because of massive temperature differences. So there are questions now that may not have been asked before that are going to start to become more important.
Really fascinating. And final question, I mean, what similarities to what's happened, although we're still learning in the last 24 hours in Spain and Portugal, apply to our power grid and our situation here? Is it highly unlikely anything similar would happen?
Yeah, well, firstly, you know, our power grid here is not interconnected across as large of an area as, you know, Spain, Portugal, France, and continental Europe. We have a very different type of electricity generation here. Our backups are very different. It's highly unlikely that we would see something like this in the UK.
Sinead, great stuff as always. Thanks so much for coming in.